Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be with you for OPTIC this year. Today, I'm going to try to talk about landscapes in a broader sense than maybe we think of them at first. This is like way beyond postcards. And I kind of began my whole photographic journey with landscapes. So this is a picture that I took on the day that I decided I needed to become a photographer. I was in a beginning photo class at the University of Minnesota, and the assignment was actually light. And I found myself on a golf course in St. Paul, Minnesota, waiting for the sun to rise because autumns are cold and foggy. And I'm laying down on the ground, and sure enough, the sun comes up, and these shards of light come flying through the tree, and it was just so beautiful. And I remember when I finished, or when the light finished, I stood up and I was wet and dirty and cold and ecstatically happy. And I realized this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And 4 years later, I took this picture for National Geographic on my first assignment. And I think it's really the same picture. It's kind of knowing about weather, getting yourself in a place and believing that something beautiful will happen. So that first assignment, was in northern Minnesota, kind of in my backyard. And I learned so much about how to give a sense of place to a story. Even with the people images, I wanted to make sure that you got a sense of what this place looked like, where this life happened. This is the liquid border between Minnesota and Canada, and it's extraordinary how much water there is and how many little islands. And so capturing that and helping people see that border really is liquid was important to me. When you're telling a story, you really are responsible for content in your images. And my first job out of college was working for a little rural daily called the Worthington Daily Globe. And it was an absolutely wonderful little newspaper. The other photographer was Jim Brandenburg, who's extraordinary. And I kind of cut my teeth on understanding that my job each day was to deliver the world to the people who lived there. And we really had very few assignments. We sort of had to do our own enterprise looking for stories and for assignments. And so this is a picture from that job that reflected what the priority for that audience was. One of the first stories I proposed for National Geographic was a story on North Dakota, which, when you're in this elite place where people are, coming back from 14 countries, and people were kind of amused that I would propose it. But I wrote a great proposal because I loved North Dakota and I knew it was not well understood. So these are pictures from that first story. And you can see how dependent the landscape work is, how important it is to give context and drama to this place that's, quite rural and quite empty. This is the graduating class of a high school in North Dakota. And, some pictures are, a building can be the landscape. It's sort of finding the context if you want to do a portrait like this one. And the content was important too, because the farm crisis was going on and a lot of little towns were disappearing. And I knew that, if a town got down to just a couple kids in high school, it wasn't long for this world. I also wanted to show the textures and of this land that's carved by water and wind. And that's, to me, that's just fun. To get up early and go looking for an example of what makes the place special is thrilling to me. So this is early in the morning. And weather is so important in this land. It's got the greatest extremes of weather of any state in our country. And it's around you all the time. This was actually the beginning of a tornado, which it was fun. I found out later. I was shooting it here, and one of my colleagues was on the other end of the state, and he was putting a camera inside a tornado, and it was pretty darn fun to see. We both covered the same storm in entirely different ways. And that harshness of the land is what builds character. Often with a landscape picture, you want something in the foreground to anchor the shot. And in this case, it was harsh, harsh winter. And just to see how the snow buried everything and made it just so inhospitable. And yet people came and they farmed. It was also, to me, landscapes that are absolute simplicity are wonderful as well. And this was just snow on snow on snow, and it was just a world of blue. So those kinds of landscapes are also, I don't know, they touch me in many ways. These are Sandhill Cranes who migrate through this area, and it's a vital migration ground. This is taken from an airplane looking down on the cranes flying over a snow-covered farm. So those are fields below, and the whooping cranes travel with the Sandhill Cranes. And I wanted to show how essential it is that this flyway is safe. This is a picture of one of the people I met there. His name is Helgi Holte, and it was literally, the wind chill was 80 below zero, and we were in his kitchen having cookies that his darling wife Amy made. And then Helgi had moved all of the livestock into the barn, but he decided he better get up and check on the cows. And so I'm like, okay, and I put on my parka and we go out. And just watching him wrestle with that barn door in this horrific wind and in this difficult land meant a lot to me. And Helgi actually died before the story was printed, but the writer called to talk to some of his neighbors to ask about him. And one of his neighbors said, I think the biggest compliment you could give a farmer or a rancher. He said, well, let me put it this way. In my next life, I wouldn't mind coming back as one of Helgi's cows. The prairie is also delicate and rare, and the amount of native prairie that's left is vanishing quickly. So there was a conservation story here too. And this is actually the picture I put in the tray to begin the presentation, because at Geographic, once you finish a story, you go into this room and all the big fat editors are, not fat, but big, large in charge editors are there, and it's very intimidating. And I was very young. So I knew I had to immediately dispel their notion of what North Dakota was. So this shot I knew would never run. It's completely art directed, but it was just fun and a surprise, and it got the story off to a great start. So what I did is I found a local cowboy, because I'd seen this road and I loved it. And I asked him if he'd come at night and be in this picture for me. And so he was so sweet. And I just had him park in front of the rock, and then I put my camera on bulb and I ran down, got in my rental car, drove up the road, turned around off camera, then drove back. And then I stopped my car behind the rock so that I could run behind him and just pop a little strobe. Now this is on film. You have no idea what you're getting, but it worked. I did it like 10 times before the police came and asked what the heck I was doing. But the goal was to have a dramatic landscape that kicked off this presentation. And of course, it was never published. At Geographic, we really are charged with giving a sense of place. And so what we realize is that it's beyond a landscape. It's more like a sense of place, because people want to know what it looks like. And that can be done in so many ways. They want to go there with you. They want to be on the camel. They want to see the land from the point of view of the people who live there. We also are asked to take new pictures of places that everybody knows. So, and that's kind of a delightful challenge too, because we're trying to figure out as photographers how to make people see it anew. So this is the Taj Mahal, of course. And I just realized that there were so many people around that to do it kind of straightforwardly just wasn't working. And so I decided to just do a reflection in the reflection pond and wait until the people created a composition from which to see the Taj. And this is the tallest building in the world. This is the Burj Al Khalifa. And how do you show the tallest building in the world in a new way? But there were these amazing, like little dandelion sculptures down at the base of it in a park. And that gave me an opportunity to see it in a new way. Easter Island, you know, we usually see kind of the moas all lined up in a place, but you know, this was midday, but by just underexposing and waiting till someone walked by, I could give a sense of the size of these things and you know, the challenge it had to have been to move them and put them in place on the island. You can also do a, you know, a cityscape, but do it in a way that makes it come to life. So I needed to do a skyline of Beirut. And there was this little theme park. So I just got on the ride a few times and shot from the perspective of the theme park at the skyline. So you can be very creative with skylines too, and with sense of place in that way. Sydney, Australia. You know, you don't want to just take a picture of the Sydney Opera House. It's iconic, but it's been done a gazillion times. But this is also a place that the brides come to be photographed on their wedding day. And so I was waiting around in the area where I'd seen brides go before, and this brother and sister who had married a brother and sister were being photographed, and their very nice photographer allowed me to take some pictures as well. And, you know, I did a story on Jerusalem, and even in places like that where the focus is so much people and politics and religion, it was important to show why the stakes are so high and why people struggle to get along. So I photographed with a very long lens, like a 600, the Dome of the Rock, and then in the back is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and in between is the Western Wall. That's how close these holy sites are. That's how much shoulders are rubbing, and why there's sort of a desperation to make sure you don't get rubbed out. And it's, you know, it's back in the soup again this week. And this is the Mount of Olives. You know, having a single figure in a landscape can help a lot. Of course, it helps with scale, but also it just takes you there. It makes it feel more real. And so this man was davening on a holy day in this cemetery. And this is, this picture has become more important to me as time has gone on because it is no more. You know, this is some of the most beautiful ancient architecture I have ever seen in Syria, in Palmyra. And of course, you know, several years ago, it was just ravaged. And so now it sort of lives on in photographs. And I think we need to remember that too, that we're recording history and things that will never come back. And really, you know, we want to meet the child, but we also want to see where she lives. And that combination, I think, adds so much information and power to the imagery we produce. And then there's the very important world of environmental portraits. And this is an example of that. This was a pastor whose church was burned down in South Carolina during a spate of church burnings. And so we went, you know, I drove with him to where the site was, where the church had been destroyed. And the only thing left was the baptismal font. And so I said, so did you do baptisms here? He said, oh yeah, I did every summer. So I stood on top of my car and said, well, can you show me how you stood? And, you know, and he walked over to and he hung his hat on the pump for the baptism site. And to me, standing back was so important because this was a tragic but sacred place. And I think we need to make those decisions too about environmental portraits. They can be close or they can be, you know, distant, but think about what is the mood you're trying to convey? What is it that you really are trying to say? This is in Mexico. And again, the atmosphere that this young woman lives in, and this is her kitchen. And she was extremely proud because she had a new baby niece, and she motioned to me as I was walking by the hut and to see if I would take a picture of her with the baby. And you just, the gift of light in a scene can help provide so much information. This was shot on film. And one of the things that's been extraordinary to me since digital arrived and improved and improved and improved is how much shadow detail you can get now in an image. Back in the film days, getting that shadow detail was really, really challenging. But there's enough in this portrait, I think, that you really understand how simple her life is. This is on top of Victoria Falls. Again, an environmental portrait of just a guy who worked at the hotel I worked at and grew up right next to Victoria Falls. And it was his place, his special place. And I happened to be there at a time when the river was not running very fast, and we were able to actually walk out, not get eaten by hippos or crocs. And in front of him is a little area, a divot in the land that creates a swimming hole. But at the end of it, as we were leaving, I was making my way back, and I looked back, and he just took this moment in this beautiful place. And when you're privileged to be with someone in their landscape, in the landscape of their hearts, you just try not to screw it up. I feel that hush. I am witnessing and am privileged to witness something really special to another human being. This is an Irish farmer, and again, environmental portrait. This picture was taken on the day his 12th child came home from the hospital. The 11th child is riding on his back here. And you can just see the land written all over his face and even over the little girl's face. This Mr. O'Sullivan. And he just was, just every inch of him was a person of the land, of hard work, of dignity, and then overwhelmed by all these kids. And this is a candomblé priestess in northern Brazil. And she was so dignified that she just had this grace and this dignity. And I was looking around the area where she lived just to find a place that was worthy of her, kind of worthy of her dignity. And it was all about light. There was an incredible ray of light that came in one afternoon. And I said, may I do your portrait? And she said, sure. And she just walked over and sat down, and just look how she's holding that silver, I don't even know what it is. And that's what you live for in an environmental portrait. These are salt workers in India. Again, it's crucial to see the land, although what we care about, is the girl. And these are monks in Dharamsala. And what I like about this is it just shows that they're just little boys. They're just little kids. And I looked over one day I was high above them, and I saw them blowing bubbles just the same way as my kids love to blow bubbles. And, you don't even see their faces, but you know them. And this little guy with the wand looks kind of like he's got Barack Obama ears. And this picture is, it was on a horseback ride where we suddenly got hit by snow, very unseasonable. But what I've learned so much by being around ranchers and cowboys and stuff, is that they first and foremost take care of the animals. And so I looked over, and this guy was just making sure his horse had feed. He was just caring for him and having this moment with him as the snow really started to pick up, and it gave a lot of meaning to the wilderness we were passing through. Sometimes there's an intimacy through a window or a door. This is in Iceland, and I just saw this little boy who lived there. I was inside this little house, and I looked out, and there he was with the boat and the sea and the land beyond, in a, lived in a village of like 3 people or 4 people, and it felt better through the door. Same here. I was in India, and there was this shelter, this tent shelter, and I went inside to get out of the sun, really. And I looked up and saw this wonderful, simple composition. And so I just waited for life to pass in front of me, and they had no idea I was in there. And there were several images that really worked, but this one, there's something beckoning and lovely about it to me. The very first time I had a mirrorless camera was when Lumix sent me the most wonderful gift I've had in many years. And so I took it to Tanzania on a shoot, and I was blown away by the camera, the size of it, and then these magnificent lenses. So this was just one of many pictures that I probably wouldn't have gotten if it weren't for this extraordinary mirror lens system that turned, a very small lens into a 600. And it was just a joy to work with. Everywhere I went, I could get incredible detail. It was so sharp. And I wasn't burdened with the, big old tripods and heavy gear. And as time has gone on, that has been such a joy for me to be freed up from all of the gear. I used to travel with, 8 or 9, 10, Pelican cases and lights and all of that stuff. And that world has changed so much. And I think it frees us to get better and more interesting images because we are unburdened. We can give our entire attention to the work. And it's really fun to get pictures like this that are close, but again, I like to see animals in their landscape as well. And so I actually prefer this picture, just because you see this cheetah just in charge of this gorgeous landscape. And if you stand back, you can get herds and amazing silhouettes. This is inside the Ngorongoro crater where, people forget how enormous it is and what an essential wildlife refuge it is. And to see these enormous African elephants in the shadow of this beautiful crater was magnificent. And the people, to see these women in the setting with their traditional boma in the background and have it all be so crisp and so beautiful. Thank you, Lumix. And there's nothing like the detail of the S1 series. It's just, I went to the Slack Canyons and I could not believe the detail and the elegance of the shapes and the colors. It was, I'd never seen anything quite like it. This is just from an airplane. I've started using my Lumix cameras from airplanes. So this is settling ponds near San Francisco, but it looks kind of like a Gilhooly sculpture. And this is in Hawaii, just playing. I've never played so much as I have now with the Lumix cameras. And one of the most important things to me is that landscape work can be used for advocacy. And that means a lot to me. And you want to see the orangutans, but I also want you to see how remote they are and how hard they are to get to. These are white pelicans, and you can tell that is not a natural shape in a salt marsh, and it's because it's been cut up by the oil industry so much. And that's, to destroy a salt marsh is to destroy everything behind it, because it's the filtering system as well as an incredible lifeline. This is all that's left of parts of the Dead Sea. because it's evaporating at such a rate that it's just leaving piles of salt behind. And this is all that's left of the mighty Colorado River as it reaches the Sea of Cortez, because we've siphoned it all off. And that's a tragedy. That's a disaster for the wildlife that lives in the Sea of Cortez. My friend Barbara King-Sullivan and I actually did a book and a traveling show to kind of praise wilderness and do it in a new way. And it was so much fun because I shot things on black and white infrared film and then hand colored them. And we tried to show the different habitats in the United States that need protection. And she wrote these exquisite essays. And it was one of the most delightful projects I've ever worked on. And it raised about $250,000 for grassroots landscape protection. What's better than that? And I'm just going to finish with pictures that are just, to me, just joyful. You know, go wander with your camera. Just go see the beauty of the earth. Let landscapes just come from your heart. You know, dip your toe in something you've never done before, and try doing landscapes, you know, without thinking that they have to be perfect. Actually, the more imperfect they are, the more beautiful they are. And just see the light. It's all about light. And what the light blesses, what the light touches. And don't forget, with humans, you can put them in a landscape and understand them better. This is Yellowstone. And this is Patagonia. So, you know, all I can say is get out there, try new things, take advantage of these extraordinary cameras, and use your photography for good. We can all do that. We can advocate for anything we really believe in. And thank you. If you want to see more, you can see, I started a nonprofit called rippleeffectimages.org with some of the best photographers in the world. And we document programs that help women and girls in the developing world. And we also started Photography for Good. And please join us, because we're trying to shine a light on all of you guys out there who are, you know, using your work for good and creating bodies of work that'll make a difference. Thanks, guys.